That is not my recollection of what I said. That is not my recollection of what I said. That is not my recollection of what I said.
I still don't understand the government's objection to having people swear an oath and assert that they will be truthful.
Former clerks who are now chairs of boards of SNC-Lavalin have easy access and immediate access into the central office of this government, into your office, when you turned down everybody else and walked out of a gala because you didn't want to see SNC anymore? Do you not see that as a problem for this country?
No.
Do you think it's fair that the Liberals on this committee voted to invite you back to address testimony of Jody Wilson-Raybould, but they just voted against extending her the same courtesy? So my question is, how can you expect Canadians to believe that these highly competent, highly credible women got this so wrong?
I'm wondering who wrote that for you, because it sounds an awful lot like some other comments that were mentioned by Mr. Butts this morning and some people who appear on panels on television.
What are you insinuating?
I'm not insinuating anything. I'm saying.
Suggest, Mr. Wernick, that the brazen and reckless interference referred to by 5 former Attorney Generals refers directly to you. And if you cannot answer that question, you have no business being in that job.
Welcome again, Mr. Michael Wernick, who's the Clerk of the Privy Council and Secretary of the Cabinet. Thank you very much for coming back before us, Mr. Wernick. Et aussi à Madame Nathalie.
Also, we'd like to welcome Ms. Nathalie Drouin, who is the Deputy Minister of Justice and Deputy Attorney General of Canada. So thank you very much for being here today, Ms. Drouin.
Monsieur le Président,
Chair.
since I last appeared at the committee some 2 weeks ago. One is the waiver that was offered to witnesses, so that will allow different lines of questioning by the committee members. And the other, apart from my cold, is the kind of traffic that I have received on social media. And I would like to present these to the committee. If somebody could please transmit them to the clerk. And I would ask the committee...
relevance, point of order, what is the relevance of social media to what we're doing in terms of reference
if I could explain,
whether a line was crossed?
If I could explain.
Yep, of course, Mr. Wernick. Go ahead, stop time. Go.
I believe that you will want to discuss this as the intimidation of a witness before your committee and a breach of the committee's privileges. You can take that up in camera if you wish. I will be distributing these to the media.
And in terms of the testimony of the former minister on February 27th.
Testimony. The following facts are not contested. She was always the decision maker. She was assured multiple times that she was the final decision maker. The former minister agreed that entering into a deferred prosecution agreement would have been entirely lawful. Je souligne que la suite de témoignages de l'ancien.
I would like to note that after the former minister's testimony, the following facts are not contested. She was always the decision maker. She was assured multiple times that she was the final decision maker. The former minister agreed that entering into a deferred prosecution agreement would have been entirely lawful.
That her decision, a decision to take no action, was final in September. But she had the ability, as new public interest considerations emerged, to reassess the context and re-examine her reasoning. And that is the most she was ever asked to do. So I repeat my contention. The minister experienced lawful advocacy to consider doing something lawful in the public interest. I made no threats, veiled or otherwise, that the minister's decision would lead to consequences for her, and my position could be captured at all times by the well-known phrase, non-ingérence, non-indifférence.
Just in terms of the decision of the DPP, there was some suggestion that Ms. Wilson-Raybould could have put something in writing if she decided she did not wish to overturn the decision. But in not doing anything, you would agree that the decision of the DPP would stand.
When an AG takes a decision whether or not to exercise his or her authorities under the DPP Act, there is no obligation to have reasons and to have written document for that.
Right, and so in not acting, the DPP decision would stand. Right. Okay.
Well, that's the conclusion. If they don't, if they don't exercise, the DPP decision states.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I understand you can't say whether you told Mr. Lemaitre about the discussion with the former Attorney General because you haven't, it hasn't been waived. But yes, you did have to tell him about important files that concern his department. We have to bear in mind when you do a briefing with ministers, particularly when there's a change in government, deputy ministers don't delve into previous positions by previous governments. That's not part of the practice. I'm not talking about previous governments. I'm talking about positions of the current government. It's the same government. Response. The DPP had decided to move ahead with criminal prosecutions, but no decision had been made by the previous Attorney General. Thank you.
I live in Victoria, BC. No surprise to you that there are many retired senior public servants from the federal government who've called me over the last while. And I have to tell you, sir, that to a person, they expressed deep concern about the line that I suggest that you've crossed. Today you said that you never give partisan advice, you don't engage in partisan activity, you're not part of someone's partisan agenda, and you're not motivated by burnishing politicians' image. However, when you appeared before us last time, you did the following. You started by talking about an assassination. You talked about fear of your country, which Professor Wes Wark characterized as the politics of fear. And then you turned and talked about extemporaneous praise for Minister Carolyn Bennett. Finally, today you brought in a number of social media comments with great respect that have nothing to do with what's before us. Mr. Gordon Robertson, the Dean of Clerks, said this in a 1971 article. The Prime Minister's office is partisan, politically oriented, yet operationally sensitive. The Privy Council office is non-partisan, operationally oriented, yet politically sensitive. The clerk and the PMO must keep out of each other's way. Sir, with great respect, how can we have listened to your testimony last time? And of course, if we believe Madam Wilson-Raybould's testimony, do anything but conclude that you have in fact crossed the line into partisan activity?
I can only repeat, I state categorically that I have never given advice or done anything for partisan purposes, which would suggest to advantage one political party versus another in the political arena.
So the attempt to change the channel last time, so the headline would be about assassination and the like, the attempt to talk about a minister who has nothing to do with this matter and how terrific she served Canada, we're to assume from that 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 was just something you wanted to get off your chest at a discussion of the Shawcross principle?
I was aware of the punditry and media traffic and social media traffic that had been triggered around this issue. I stand by every word I said in the opening statement. They come from a deep place of concern about this country, and I repeat them. I have had the highest security clearances of this country, and I am deeply worried about foreign interference in the election. If that was seen as alarmist, so be it. I was pulling the alarm. We need a public debate about foreign interference.
So we do.
I am never accepting that we would normalize the cyberbullying of political officials. I have been exposed to it. It upsets me and it angers me. And I am upset by the trolling that took place of Minister Bennett. I stand by that. That was not to the partisan advantage of the Liberal Party. I deplore the cyberbullying of politicians of all stripes.
Thank you. So do we all, although what that has to do with this is a little unclear. On December 19,
it may have to do with the intimidation of a witness.
On December 19, 2018, we had a number of comments made by Madam Justice Wilson-Raybould about yourself, and I want to give you the opportunity to refute them. Number one, you're quoted as saying, I think he is going to find a way, speaking about the Prime Minister, to get it done one way or the other. So he is in that kind of mood, and I wanted you to be aware of it, close quote. Did you say that? Or words approximating that?
I do not have an independent recollection of the event. I did not wear a wire, record the conversation, or take extemporaneous notes.
So you wouldn't have stuck in your mind words like that?
That is not my recollection of the conversation.
Then she said she warned you in this call that we were treading on dangerous ground. I also issued a stern warning because, as the Attorney General, I cannot act in a manner, and the prosecution cannot act in a manner that is not objective, that isn't independent. I cannot act in a partisan way, and I cannot be politically motivated. This all screams of that, close quote. Sound right?
I do not have contemporaneous notes or recording of that conversation. I recall the sentiment, and I agree with it. Nobody was ever asking her to do anything for partisan reasons.
The clerk said that the Prime Minister is quite determined, quite firm, but he wants to know why the DPA route, which Parliament provided for, isn't being used. I think he's going to find a way to get it done one way or the other. He's in that kind of mood. Can you not see that she might reasonably interpret those words, if they were in fact made, as code, as a sinister effort to get her to change her mind? Couldn't a reasonable person hear that and conclude, as she did, that it was very much a veiled threat?
I am in no position to comment what was in the mind of another person. I can only comment on what I was conveying to her, which was context and public interest considerations on a decision that was entirely hers to make.
So entirely hers, pardon me?
Last question.
So entirely for her to make, but you certainly tried, it seems to her, to have changed her mind in a way that would cross the line that we're here to explore. She took it as a veiled threat. When I read it back to you, I think a reasonable person could likewise infer that it was a veiled threat. And it seems to me, sir, you very much crossed the line in respect of an independent Attorney General.
Respectfully disagree. I never raised partisan considerations at any time. I reminded her repeatedly she was the final decision maker. I did not attempt to influence her decision. I was giving her relevant context about public interest considerations for a decision that was hers to take, and I never suggested consequences for her.
Mr. Wernick, on September 17th, 2018, in your presence, the Prime Minister told the Attorney General that if there was no deferred prosecution agreement, that SNC will move from Montreal. Did the Prime Minister know at the time that a financing agreement with the Caisse de dépôt made it impossible for SNC to move its headquarters before the year 2024? Yes or no?
That is not my recollection of what the Prime Minister said.
So he did not say that the SNC will move from Montreal if it does not get a deferred prosecution agreement?
That's not my recollection of what he said.
All right. How about let's turn to what you said. Hopefully your memory is a little better on that. At the same meeting, you told the Attorney General that there would be a board meeting of SNC-Lavalin within 3 days, and they will be likely be moving to London. Who told you that SNC would likely announce a move of its headquarters to London at its September 20th, 2018 board meeting?
That is not my recollection of what I said.
Are you certain that you did not say it?
That is not my recollection of what I said. If I could explain, if you're interested in the answer, the company was operating under disclosure obligations at all times as a publicly traded company. In mid-September, the company was approaching a requirement to divulge to markets what was going on because it was 90 days after the DPP legislation had been passed. So an announcement by the company was imminent, and an announcement by the company was imminent at regular intervals through the fall and the winter because of their obligations to markets.
And when did that announcement come?
The track record of what the company said and when is on the public record. I'm not aware of that.
Okay. Also, at a December 2018 meeting, you, Ms. Raybould says, you said, and I quote, you spoke about the company's board and the possibility of them selling out to somebody else, moving their headquarters, and job losses. Did you say that?
The options open to the company were a matter of public record in the business press.
Yes,
if I could finish, sir. If I could finish, sir.
It's just that here's the problem. Yep. The public record was clear that they were not moving their headquarters. That was the public record. Anybody who could use Google could find shareholder disclosures showing the company had to stay in Montreal for at least another 6 years. And when you said on December 19th that the company was moving its headquarters if it didn't get a DPA, that was 2 days after the Toronto Star reported that the CEO said the company is, quote, committed to remaining headquartered in Montreal. How is it possible that you didn't know that 2 days earlier the company had publicly stated its plans to stay in Montreal when you told the Attorney General the opposite?
So you will know, sir, that it is possible for a company to retain a shell headquarters in a city and move the guts of its operations somewhere else.
But that's not what you said. You said that the headquarters would move.
That is not my recollection of what I said. I never said at any point in any conversation, this is what the company will do, because I would have no knowledge of that. I would know that there was potential risk of a number of outcomes from the company. I had communications with the company on September 18th in the afternoon, and I've just provided the committee with the notes that were taken of that meeting. And I took a call from the chair of the board on around 11 o'clock in the morning on October 18th. Those are my sole communications with the company.
But with respect, your suggestion that the headquarters would become a shell is also impossible, because the loan agreement with Case requires that the CEO, all the senior executive, all the decision-making, a large number of the board members would have to stay in Montreal. It was also public knowledge the company had just signed a 20-year lease in Montreal and announced massive and costly renovations to continue to house its HQ in Montreal. And the CEO had said publicly that he was staying in Montreal. Knowing all of that public information, why did you say precisely the opposite to the Attorney General?
That is not my recollection of what I said. And
did you say anything about moving the HQ?
If I can,
did you say anything about moving the HQ to the Attorney General? Yes or no?
Mr. Chair, I would ask you for the ability to answer questions.
Please let the witness answer the question on this.
I would welcome that.
Go ahead, Mr. Wernick.
Fact number one about the entire file is that the case is going to trial, and there is a prosecution underway. The possible outcome of that is a conviction, which would bar the company from public infrastructure contracts across the country and possibly in international markets. So the company was and is at risk.
Yes, but once again, my question, very simple. Did you or the Prime Minister ever tell the Attorney General that the headquarters would move if she did not sign a deferred prosecution agreement?
No.
Yes, you did not?
No, I did not.
Okay, thank you. And now that I have 20 seconds,
yep, you do.
Were you aware that the government was working on a provision to allow SNC-Lavalin or companies like it that are convicted to continue to bid on federal contracts? Yes or no?
These are not yes or no questions, sir. It is well known that...
To finish the answer. Go ahead. Even though the time's expired, please, Mr. Wernick, finish the answer.
So the law was brought into effect over the spring and summer of last year. It finally was brought into effect, I think, in mid-September. Like many pieces of legislation, it would require implementation regulations and protocols. And it is a matter of public record that there were extensive consultations, which are still underway by the PSPC department about implementation of the law. Those were done in the public domain, the input is there, and the Minister of Public Services and Procurement has not pronounced and issued those regulations. The purpose, as I understand it, was to make sure it wasn't a binary choice and that there would be options available to a government in terms of the consequences of a conviction, a ladder of sanctions.
Mr. Wernick, you have given incredibly conflicted testimony, and I'm going to take you through some of it. The crux of the issue, according to Mr. Butts this morning, was what and when did the Attorney General, the former Attorney General, tell the Prime Minister himself or you that she had made up her mind and she was not going to change it? Now, I asked you that question when you were here last. You didn't give an answer specifically, but we ended up settling on September 17th. Would you now say your testimony is you found out from the Attorney General, former Attorney General, that she had made up her mind on this issue by September 17th?
I accept that on September 17th, in her mind, she had made a final decision. In law, the decision was never final because she could always take into consideration public interest considerations and was able to take into account new information.
Okay. Mr. Wernick, you have provided for us your contact with SNC-Lavalin. I find it very helpful, and I want to thank you for it, but I am troubled by one thing. You went to great lengths at telling us in your last testimony about how you had only a few meetings with them, and indeed that you had several email requests for a meeting on September 18th, the meeting you took. You registered it. Then you told us about running into SNC executives at the NAC Gala, and that you left right away. Indeed, the clerk contact also indicates there were further requests for more meetings until October 15th. And you took a call from the former clerk of the Privy Council, Kevin Lynch.
I believe that's the 18th.
I have October 15th here in this, whatever the date was, the date is this.
Whatever the date was.
Here's my concern. Here's my concern. You rejected everybody else in terms of speaking about SNC-Lavalin, but you took the meeting from the former clerk of the Privy Council. And my concern is this. Section 33 of the Conflict of Interest Codes sets out exactly what a previous office holder can and cannot do. And what it says is, no former public office holder shall act in such a manner as to take improper advantage of his or her previous public office. Now, you rejected all SNC. You told us with great glee that you walked out of an important dinner that you wanted to go to because you didn't want to be seen with them, and yet you took a call from a former clerk. Do you have concerns that the former clerk breached his duties and obligations to Canada?
No.
You don't think that you took the call from Kevin Lynch because he was the former clerk of the Privy Council?
No.
Why did you take the call from Mr. Lynch?
Mr. Lynch was the chair of the board. I knew this was an active issue in October. I took the meeting with the company. They are not a pariah. It was not improper to have communications with the company. The conversation was a telephone conversation, not a meeting, and it lasted less than 10 minutes. Mr. Lynch, as the chair of the board, expressed his frustration that he did not understand why a DPA was not being considered, and he knew that the board, in its trustee relationships for the shareholders in the company, was going to have to take some tough decisions in October and November. My recollection of the conversation is he asked, isn't there anything that can be done? And I told him in the firmest, curtest possible terms, no, he would have to go through the Attorney General and the DPP through his counsel.
Wow. So not more than 2 weeks ago, when you gave your first testimony about having no contact with SNC, you said nothing about this phone call, and yet today
I was cut off, if you recall, Ms. Raitt. I was proceeding to read the chronology, and I was cut off with it incomplete and undertook to provide the chronology to the committee, which I have done.
Well, thank you for cutting me off, Clerk. But as I was going to say, I think it's incredibly pertinent, and you must have had a knowledge of it because you gave us almost a verbatim right now about what the content of that telephone call is. Can you not see how disturbing this could be for Canadians to see that former clerks who are now chairs of boards of SNC-Lavalin have easy access and immediate access into the central office of this government, into your office, when you turned down everybody else and walked out of a gala because you didn't want to see SNC anymore? Do you not see that as a problem for this country?
No.
We've exhausted the 5 minutes on that one. We will go to Mr. Rankin.
Mr. Angus, go, and I'll take the next round.
Okay.
Sure, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Wernick, I'm looking at your statement, and I find it pretty thin gruel, given the fact that 5 former attorney generals have asked for an RCMP investigation. Former Liberal Attorney General Michael Bryant said he's never seen such, quote, brazen and reckless interference in an independent prosecution. We have had 2 cabinet ministers resign. Ms. Philpott saying she had constitutional and ethical obligations in the face of political interference. You are one of the key political actors in this, Mr. Wernick, and yet I find that's missing from here is any attempt to explain what happened in that key meeting of December 19th, where we asked Ms. Wilson-Raybould on record if you threatened her, and she said she wasn't threatened once, she was threatened 3 times by you. And then she said that you wanted to find a way to talk directly to the prosecutor, which would be the interference, direct interference in the prosecution case. And she warned you that you were on dangerous ground. How come you haven't even tried to rebut her testimony?
I haven't been asked a question, Mr. Angus. I do not have independent recollection of what I said. I did not record the conversation. I did not wear a wire. I did not take contemporaneous notes. And that is not my recollection of the way the conversation flowed.
Can I put it to you, Mr. Wernick? You're asked about threatening the Attorney General. You're asked about treading on dangerous ground, and you tell our committee, well, I wasn't wearing a wire. Sorry, I don't remember. Mr. Wernick, that is not a credible answer. You are to be the clerk of the Privy Council. If you come to a meeting and you can't remember threatening the Attorney General and tell us, well, I'm sorry, I wasn't wearing a wire, I suggest, Mr. Wernick, that the brazen and reckless interference referred to by 5 former Attorney Generals refers directly to you. And if you cannot answer that question, you have no business being in that job.
So I have said at this committee before, and I would say again, I did not threaten the Attorney General.
But you don't remember. You told us you don't remember.
I am telling you now, Mr. Angus, if
you don't remember.
If you want the answer,
Finish the answer to the question. Mr. Clerk.
I have never raised partisan considerations. I reminded her repeatedly she was the final decision maker. I did not attempt to influence her decision. I was giving her relevant context about public interest considerations. I did not suggest any consequences for her. I made no threats to the former Attorney General.
Oh, so
period.
now you remember. But I will just end on this. She said she expected the Saturday Night Massacre, which is a reference to Richard Milhouse Nixon and the firing of the special prosecutor. And lo and behold, she was replaced 2 weeks later. So I think Ms. Wilson-Raybould's testimony is very credible, and I'm very sad that you get a second kick at the can, and she's not being given a chance to rebut what you're saying today.
Thank you.
So, Mr. Chair, if I may,
Mr. Wernick, yes, you may respond to that.
quickly. I note that many members at this committee have said they believe every word of the former Attorney General's testimony. Part of what she testified is she does not believe that any behavior crossed the threshold of criminal behavior. So that was her testimony.
That's the bar? It's not criminal?
That was her testimony.
Okay,
That was her testimony.
Thank you. Okay, no cross talk back and forth. Thank you very much. So that concludes.
I'm going to refer Mr. Wernick to the documents that you provided to us this afternoon that we had requested last time, and I'm wondering if you can give me a little bit of help with the handwritten notes. Do you have a copy of them there?
I believe so.
Great. The handwritten notes of your COO, Deputy Secretary to the Cabinet. Midway down, it says we're looking forward to DPA, and this is what SNC-Lavalin says. Initial indication with Minister is to discussion. Can you give me a little bit more color as to what's being said there?
I believe these are the words, transcription of the words from the company.
Yeah. Do you recall what the comment was there?
Which part are you referring to?
Initial indication with respect to, I can't make out what the rest of it is. I'm wondering if you can help us.
So what the notes allow us to confirm is that on September 18th in the afternoon, the company had not been informed by the DPP that a DPA was going to be declined.
Okay. Interestingly enough, that is not what the legal officer to the DPP said in her letter to SNC-Lavalin. I understand.
It's what the company said.
Sure. You also provided for us the clerk contact with SNC. Is this everything in the contacts now? You're content that it's the entirety of your interactions with SNC-Lavalin?
It's everything that I'm aware of. When the Ethics Commissioner began a process, which is some time ago, there was an immediate request for all documents and records remotely related to SNC-Lavalin to be secured, and they were secured and they were sequestered. And that is probably, now that I think about it, why Mr. Butts's email traffic was secured and sequestered.
Oh, glad you understand the question now. So in your testimony previous, you said that I asked you if you were informed of the September 4 decision by the Director of Public Prosecutions. You said no. And then by midway of your testimony, you indicated, I think she advised the Prime Minister of her view that a deferred prosecution agreement was not a good course and she had no intention of intervening, and indeed she has never intervened. So as I said before, we're on safe ground to say that you and the Prime Minister both knew on September 17th that she had made her final decision and had no intention of intervening.
And as a matter of law, the decision is never final because she could always take into consideration public interest considerations and was able to take into account new information.
Okay. I appreciate that. Are you a lawyer, Mr. Wernick?
No, I'm not.
Okay. Who wrote that for you?
I have retained personal counsel because Mr. Scher's letter to the RCMP.
Right. So you're telling me that your lawyer wrote that for you?
My lawyer advised me on the boundaries of my testimony this afternoon.
Yeah, but what you just read there is interesting to me about making the assertion that everything was okay. I'm wondering who wrote that for you, because it sounds an awful lot like some other comments that were mentioned by Mr. Butts this morning and some people who appear on panels on television.
What are you insinuating?
I'm not insinuating anything. I'm saying
You are
it flat
insinuating.
out.
What are you
I'm
insinuating?
asking you who wrote that for you, Mr. Wernick.
I wrote it on my computer after conversations with my counsel.
Okay, so that wasn't so hard to say. I'm wondering if I could read to you, Mr. Wernick, what Jody Wilson-Raybould said in her testimony. She said, the clerk of the Privy Council would have known on September 17th meeting because I specifically mentioned to both him and the Prime Minister going into detail about the Section 13 notice that I received, and that, again, I was very clear that I've already made my decision around the deferred prosecution agreement and not intervening. There's no reason not to take that as a fact, is there?
As I testified last time, 90% of the conversation at that meeting and the reason for my presence was to discuss the Indigenous agenda.
I didn't ask about that. I asked you whether or not that's a fact in your mind now. Is that an agreed fact between you and I, that on September 17th she went into detail about the Section 13 notice? Or do you not remember it now?
I do not believe that it was in detail or lengthy. She made her position clear as she testified that in her mind she had made a final decision.
Pour préciser encore une fois,
Just to specify things once again.
the former Attorney General went into a meeting with the Prime Minister on September 17th without the benefit of your full advice on whether to pursue independent legal advice.
Well, on December 17, she was in possession of the legal opinion I described in my opening remarks.
Okay. This is a key point because she instructed you to not raise the matter of SNC anymore. How do you reconcile this with her legal and professional responsibility to consider public policy interests, such as the impact on jobs and other considerations that we've heard here?
I mean, I think it's for her to answer that. I would like to offer that she said last week that she did her due diligence when she received a Section 13 letter. In the legal opinion that I described, we say that the first thing for an AG is really to make sure that she has all the information she needs to take her decision.
Okay,
Well,
premièrement, did that affect the government's ability to get an external opinion on a new policy tool?
Le gouvernement peut toujours aller
The government can always seek opinions when it is developing a new program, but only with the approval of the Attorney General. If your question is whether the government will seek legal advice on a criminal file in particular, the opinion I said was that even if it was suggested to seek outside legal advice, we would recommend transparency and a publication of this advice in the Canada Gazette. The fact that the former Attorney General said that she didn't want any more work on this file, did this prevent the government from seeking other legal advice on the SNC file? She is the person who decides on this file. And when she makes her decision, it means the door is closed. She's the only one who can decide to exercise her powers under the DPP Act.
December 19th, there was lots being said there. You mentioned, and it's been mentioned in testimony, that the Prime Minister and the former Minister were at loggerheads over issues. Were they at loggerheads over an issue, any other issue other than SNC-Lavalin? Was there something else at play here?
I'm not sure that's a question I should answer because it's not covered by the SNC question.
Is there an issue that they were at loggerheads over other than SNC-Lavalin?
I think, and I do not have contemporaneous notes of the conversation. I would not say they were at loggerheads. I was worried as a Secretary of Cabinet that frustration was building, that colleagues and the Prime Minister had not been provided an explanation for why the DP8 route or option was not being chosen or exercised, and why seeking outside counsel to do due diligence on the first use of a DP8 was not being chosen. There was building frustration at the time, and I was concerned about that. The smooth functioning of cabinet requires that ministers have a good working relationship with each other.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, I have a couple questions for Mr. Wernick and a couple questions for Ms. Drouin. For you, Mr. Wernick, picking up on what in the last round, I asked you a number of questions about the call you made on September the 19th to the former Attorney General, December 19th. Yes, and thank you. And you said you didn't recall a number of things I asked you. Now, we have as a fact that the Honourable Jody Wilson-Raybould and Dr. Philpott quit their jobs. They resigned from Cabinet. And you're telling Canadians that you don't remember saying any of the key things that the former Attorney General testified to. So my question is, how can you expect Canadians to believe that these highly competent, highly credible women got this so wrong?
I think there's a few plot holes in the question. It is very clear from the sequence events that whatever triggered the Minister Raybould Wilson's resignation happened after she was moved and after the appearance of the Globe and Mail story.
Okay. I have another one for you, and this goes to your experience in setting up fair process as a clerk, and over your 37 years as a public servant, you've seen the need for fairness in public institutions. My question is this: do you think it's fair that the Liberals on this committee voted to invite you back to address testimony of Jody Wilson-Raybould, but they just voted against extending her the same courtesy?
I think this is entirely for the committee to decide.
So you have no opinion, based on your vast experience with agencies, boards, and commissions, whether that's a fair process?
I work for the executive, and I will not opine on how Parliament should conduct its business.
Okay, I'd like to turn then, if I could, to Ms. Drouin. In your account, you referred to September 19th, and you write the following: I clearly recall that the former Attorney General said to me that this would be the last time we discussed the SNC-Lavalin matter, and she instructed me to not have any discussion with the DPP, close quote. So she had decided by that day. It seems clear from your testimony that you agreed to that. So unless there was any new evidence, why would one continue to raise this matter with her over and over again? Now, we heard it said that the Attorney General's decision is never final. But if there's no new evidence, no new facts, which I think you replied to Mr. Sassy on, why would that be appropriate to keep going at her when she said, and you record in your testimony, that she had made up her mind on that date?
Maybe one thing, so I cannot say whether or not new evidence, new facts was under the government hands at that point.
It was helpful, Mr. Rankin. I firmly believe there were new facts that emerged between September and December.
Well, that's new evidence that's not been brought to this table before. And I understood you replied as a lawyer to a question from Mr. Sassy that it had to do with whether there were new facts or evidence. That's what you said.
I said.
Are you telling us there is any new fact and evidence? I understand that Mr. Wernick believes there are. What would that evidence be?
I said that I cannot talk about.
You can't talk about it.
I mean, not that I can't.
Can anybody talk about it?
No.
You
I don't know if new facts or new evidence were available at that time.
That's good to know.
Mr. Wernick is ready to answer that question.
I asked the question of Ms. Drouin. Am I going to be docked on my time, Chair, as a consequence?
Go ahead. If you don't want to, please go ahead.
Well, I'm happy to have him reply if it's not costing me the very scarce seconds I have.
Well, now so I'm going to stop it for a second. But no, that you should proceed with your time how you want. He offered to answer.
I'm offering Mr. Wernick, who wishes to intervene, the opportunity to do so.
The new facts that emerged, which I believe were public interest considerations, were the tanking of the share price of the company, making it vulnerable to takeovers, and communications from the new Premier of Quebec and the government of Quebec, which changed the risk calculus around a conviction or not conviction of the company.
All right. Thank you very much.
Just finally, because Mr. Butts claimed there was new evidence, which would be reason to intervene in a direct public prosecution. But Mr. Wernick, you said this new evidence consisted of SNC's share price. When the Prime Minister's office wrote that legislation, they specifically exempted the economic argument. So Ms. Wilson-Raybould was very clear that this could not be. And yet you believe that if it's something that you think can happen, well, we'll just make it happen. If economic argument was written by the Prime Minister's office as not allowable, how do you get to claim that's new? That's not new evidence. That's new opinion.
So the phrase national economic interest in the legislation is a cut and paste from the OECD code on anti-bribery. And it is meant, in my understanding, and you can seek advice on this from experts, to distinguish national economic interest from the interest of other countries. So you can't, if you're part of this group in the OECD, you cannot favor or let a company off because it helps France versus Germany or Germany versus Italy or Canada versus the United States.
But it could be perfectly fine to be used in an election.
So if I could finish the question,
then the time has expired.
my view is that the economic impacts of jobs, and it's explicitly in the criminal code, the impact on suppliers, pensioners, customers, communities, is a relevant public interest consideration.
Chair, I look to you for guidance as to the receivability of the following motion, but I'll read it and then explain why I believe it's critical. My motion is that the committee A, call on the Prime Minister to amend the Order in Council number 2019-0105 to allow the former Attorney General to speak openly about any matter salient to the SNC-Lavalin matter after January 14th, and to call as witnesses as soon as possible the following 4 individuals: Jessica Prince, former Chief of Staff to Ms. Wilson-Raybould; Katie Telford, Chief of Staff to the Prime Minister; Elder Marquez, Senior Advisor to the Prime Minister; and Mathieu Bouchard, Senior Advisor to the Prime Minister. Mr. Chair, the reason I think this is so important, if I may, is that there were 2 meetings that we heard a lot about today. One, November the 22nd, where Madam Wilson-Raybould met with Mr. Bouchard and Mr. Elder. And then there was a second meeting that her Chief of Staff took with Katie Telford. I think it's really important from a matter of natural justice and fairness to those individuals that we hear from them. Let me explain why. It's hearsay what Ms. Prince recorded about her conversation. And with respect, she said some very disturbing things attributed to Ms. Telford, namely that we don't want to debate legalities anymore, direct quote. Now, in fairness to Ms. Telford, we need to have her here, and we need to have also Ms. Prince here so we can get at the bottom of that, what appears to be a very serious issue. I think it's fair to both of them to do it. I think it's grossly unfair to not have that testimony. And lastly, when it comes to the November 22nd meeting with Mr. Bouchard, Mr. Marcus, and the former Attorney General, there was some very serious things said about enough is enough, I keep saying no, I've made up my mind, etc., and yet we know what transpired thereafter. My point is, fairness requires that we hear these witnesses, and as to the first part of the motion, it seems grossly unfair, with all due respect, that we were allowing Mr. Butts to come and talk about what happened after she was removed from cabinet, but she can't do so. So my plea to this committee is in the interest of fairness that we allow this to occur.
Mr. Chair, it's necessary for Madame Jody Wilson-Raybould to return. We now have contradictions between witnesses. Another good reason why we should have allowed them to swear an oath before they spoke. I still don't understand the government's objection to having people swear an oath and assert that they will be truthful. But what contradiction worries me the most is that...
Are you moving an amendment right now to Mr. Rankin's motion?
No, I'm speaking to the motion. You said...
But the motion doesn't involve Ms. Wilson-Raybould.
Sorry, I misunderstood then. I thought the motion did involve Mr.
No.
Okay, I apologize.
I moved that motion this morning, and I was defeated by the Liberal majority, Mr. Poillievre. Okay. I'm now asking for 4 witnesses, separate from that particular witness, to come forward.
Okay, I move the amendment that Ms. Jody Wilson-Raybould be recalled, and that the committee call on the government to release any further, release her to tell any further information that happened after she was named Veterans Affairs Minister. Thank you. That's my amendment.
Okay, I understand that. Ms. Raitt?
Speaking to the amendment?
Sure.
Ms. Wilson-Raybould has sent a statement to the media this afternoon indicating she would be willing to reappear at the committee. I think as a result, she is clearly doing what Mr. Butts did last week, which was asking for an opportunity. So that's why we moved the amendment to make sure that we were able to consider this with the new evidence that has recently arisen.
Appreciate that. Ms. Wilson-Raybould testified that both the clerk and the Prime Minister on multiple occasions and on separate dates told her that if she did not immediately proceed towards a deferred prosecution agreement to shelve the charges against SNC-Lavalin, that the company would move its headquarters out of Montreal. We know that's impossible because of a loan agreement between the company and the Caisse de Dépôt that is part of a $1.5 billion financing deal. So somebody would have been telling her a blatant falsehood in an attempt to get her to sign the deferred prosecution agreement with false information. Now, today, Mr. Wernick denied having said that. Ms. Wilson-Raybould's testimony alleges that he did say it on two separate occasions, once in September and then once again in December. So we have a major divergence of factual accounts between these two witnesses. Mr. Wernick has been given a second chance to come back and testify, whereas Ms. Wilson-Raybould has not. She would have a stronger case for returning because, as we all know, she was prohibited from telling her entire story when she first came before the committee. So the government must release her, eliminate completely the gag order that prevents her from telling the whole truth so that she can come back. And I will close by returning to my first point. It has been alleged, and I argue been proven, that members of the Prime Minister's inner circle pressured Madam Wilson-Raybould into making a decision she did not want to make. However, it may be more serious than that. If the Prime Minister, the Clerk of the Privy Council, and other senior staff deliberately told a falsehood to Canada's top law officer to trick her into shelving criminal charges, then that could rise to a higher level of criminal conduct. And we have significant evidence that such a claim was made by those officials, including the Prime Minister, to Madam Wilson-Raybould. It is incumbent upon us to have her come back here, now that Mr. Wernick has had an opportunity to contradict her, and tell her side of the story. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chair. A few things here. I mean, the way that the committee has functioned on these meetings up to this point is in a step-by-step fashion in order to determine the next steps, in order to determine what we've learned at the various meetings regarding the testimony, and then to have a subsequent meeting involving next steps. I know that was the motion that convened to the parameters of today's meeting, was in order for us to hear the testimonies today, have an opportunity to reflect on it, and then at the following meeting determine the way forward for the committee, including whatever next steps may follow. And in previous times we've done that, we've seen further witnesses come forward. I note a couple of things. I note, first of all, that Ms. Jody Wilson-Raybould had the order in council, which allowed her to speak to a number of things that were not able to be spoken about by Ms. Drouin and Mr. Wernick the last time that they were here. And so that was one of the main reasons to have them back. I recognize as well Ms. Jody Wilson-Raybould had the opportunity to
have an extensive opening statement, and that was obviously given to Mr. Butts today as well. But also, I think she testified for a period of about 4 hours. So it's obvious we have a lot of information before us now as a committee. My suggestion is that we reflect on today's testimony and do what the motion convening today's meeting had anticipated, which is at the next meeting, determine the next steps. So I think for all of those reasons, it's important for us to see that next meeting be when we come back on March 18th and determine where we go from there. So for those reasons, I'm asking to put consideration of the motion over to that date.
So can we just consider it incorporated into the original motion? So we're adding one other witness into the original motion. Now Mr. Fraser is suggesting to defer that until Tuesday the 19th.
And that is what I wanted to respond to.
So that works perfectly, because then we can deal with it that way.
Chair, and Mr. Fraser suggests that we reflect on this behind closed doors instead of before the public. That has been the consistent way that Liberal MPs have approached these issues. At every step of the way, they have tried to block and obstruct hearing from witnesses until they really feel that they have no choice. It may be, and it may very well be, that we need to hear from additional witnesses, but in the face of the testimony of today, it is inconceivable to think that we would not hear from Jessica Prince, Katie Telford, Elder Marquez, and Matthew Bouchard. Mr. Butts, very conveniently, we heard from Mr. Butts, who spoke to his version of events on the November 18th December 18th meeting. And so it seems perfectly appropriate, in fact necessary, to hear from the two other witnesses, two other participants at that meeting, Ms. Prince and Ms. Telford. It's completely clear that Elder Marquez and Matthew Bouchard repeatedly met with or communicated with Jody Wilson Raybould's Chief of Staff and Jody Wilson Raybould herself, including on November 22nd, but at other dates with her Chief of Staff, including October 18th and October 26th, to pressure or to reiterate the need for, among other things, an outside opinion. So how can we not hear from those individuals in order to understand exactly what was discussed and in order to understand the full context? And as for Ms. Wilson Raybould, it is absolutely clear that we need to hear from her about the period after she was fired as the former Attorney General. And as Mr. Poillievre said, it is all the more important in light of her testimony that on two occasions, the Prime Minister and the Clerk of the Privy Council raised an impossibility with her, and that is that SNC-Lavalin would be moving its headquarters. And Mr. Wernick, after being questioned by Mr. Poillievre for about 5 minutes, dodged his straightforward question about whether or not he had ever said that, and then he flat out denied that he ever said it, contradicting himself when he appeared before our committee last, where he stated, quote, that we openly discussed about the company moving or closing. That was his characterization of what took place at the meeting with Jody Wilson Raybould when she said that she was threatened not once, not twice, but 3 times by Mr. Wernick. He said 2 weeks ago that he talked about moving the company, and then after he was cornered, he suddenly issued a blanket denial. We need to hear from Jody Wilson-Raybould as well. So, why delay, and why should we have to wait 13 days to make a decision? What we need is this process to continue in an expeditious fashion. There is no basis for why this should have to wait, this decision should have to wait another almost 2 weeks when it is so painfully obvious that all of these individuals, these 4 individuals, plus Jody Wilson-Raybould, are necessary to hear from in order to understand the full truth.
Time to wrap it up soon, I appreciate, but I just want to say to my friend Mr. Fraser in response to his comments that yes, indeed, it has been our process to deal in camera with the selection of witnesses. That's the context, however, where we're trying to not embarrass people in public about which witness we choose, which expert we like over another. I think that's the purpose for which we've done that. I don't think it's written in stone. Now, the Liberals' motion was that we proceed step by step, all right, but I think we can agree that circumstances are a little different today. We have some serious testimony that seems to be contradicted, and I just think it's a matter of fairness to Ms. Katie Telford to defend herself, to be given an opportunity to confront the statement that I read into the record, that our witness, Ms. Wilson-Raybould, read into the record. And I think that if it's a question of her extensive statement, to which Mr. Fraser alluded that she did last time, and I'm happy to have her waive such a statement. We don't need it now. We're getting into the facts and so forth. So I think that the Liberals on the committee, if they vote down now an effort for us to tell Canadians we're going to continue to get to the truth of this, they're doing a disservice to our committee. They're doing a disservice to the notion of getting to the truth. I agree with Mr. Cooper. It's painfully obvious these witnesses must be heard. Let's just get on with it.
We're going to go back to the amendment, and here it is.
Follows that all the words after that be replaced by the following: the committee should consider next steps and potential additional witnesses on Tuesday, March 19th, 2019. That is the amendment to give effect to what Mr. Fraser suggested. Yeah. So the recorded vote is on the amendment. So those in favor of Mr. Fraser's amendment would vote yes. Those who are against would vote no. Okay. Mr. Clerk.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Alors,
Thank you, Chair.
Mr. Sassy?
Sorry.
I'm in French. I approve.
Yes.
Yes.
Mr. Sassy?
Yes. Enfin.
Mr. Fraser?
Yes.
Ms. Khalid?
Yes.
Mr. McKinnon?
Oui.
Mr. Barrett?
No.
Mr. Cooper?
No.
Ms. Raitt? No. And Mr. Rankin?
No.
So yeas 4 and nays 5.
Yeas 5 and yeas 4. So the amendment is carried, and now we would vote on the motion as amended by Mr. Fraser's amendment.
That's right.
So another recorded vote was requested by Mr. Cooper. So, Mr. Clerk, now it's on the motion as amended.
Can you read that motion?
It would read exactly like it read before.
Monsieur Boissonnault?
Oui.
Mr. Sassy?
Yes.
Mr. Fraser?
Yes.
Ms. Khalid?
Yes.
Mr. McKinnon?
Yes.
Mr. Barrett?
No.
Mr. Cooper?
No.
Ms. Raitt?
No.
And Mr. Rankin?
Nope.
So yeas 5, nays 4, 4.
So the motion is carried. Is there anything else? If not, colleagues, I wish you all a lovely rest of the day. Meeting adjourned.